Chapter 4 Ignited Minds Learning from Saints and Seers. For the society to prosper, there are two important needs. They are prosperity through wealth generation and cherishing the value system of the people. The combination of the two will make the nation truly strong and prosperous. I always tell the young to dream. This message comes from the understanding that each one of us has within ourselves the ability to create the circumstances for success, to attract, so to say, to ourselves what we desire. When, as a child, Einstein first saw a compass, he was fascinated by the way the needle moved whenever he changed directions. Watching the needle became an obsession with him as he tried to understand the invisible force that moved the compass needle. Where was the force located? Who controlled it? Why did it always work? What was it made of? Where the places where it didn't operate? It is, of course, the magnetic energy of the earth that keeps pulling the compass needle, a tiny magnet, along the north-south axis of the earth's magnetic field. But is that all there is to it? We can easily see the magnetic field at work, but cannot detect it with our senses. Even though it is everywhere on our planet, logically then, it is in us also. Similarly, our planet is in a perpetual state of motion and it goes spinning through space. Everything on the planet is a part of this movement, even though it appears to us that we are motionless. I am on the planet and thus part of the energy that moves it. The energy that is the very essence of the planet is in me. Dyer argues that we can use this universal energy to bring to us the objects of a desire because what we desire is also in us and vice versa. It becomes a matter of alignment and will that allows us to tap into this force. With thoughts like these on the points where science and spiritualism converge, I carved out opportunities to visit a few unique places in a year's time. Most of these places were new to me and offered me the chance to learn more about certain things I had always been interested in but could not explore, such as the world of saints and seers. I saw a diverse range of activities being carried out in the spiritual centers I visited. At one, it was the value-based education being provided that impressed me. At another place, an attempt was being made to integrate ancient science with modern and Sanskrit documents were being studied to gauge the progress made in earlier times. I saw how a Sufi saint could become a magnet for people of different faiths. I had an extended discussion on the fusion of science and spirituality with a guru. I saw how a Punya Atma can go beyond providing religious strength to setting up hospitals and universities and also a scheme for supply of water. There was one place which seeks to alleviate the distress of patients who are suffering from terminal cancer. Another center was exploring the link between medical science and meditation. My journey started on 13 June 2001 when I met Pramukh Swami Maharaj of Swami Narayan Sanstha at Ahmedabad. My discussion with Swamiji on the fusion of science and spirituality and the role it could play in nation development went on for an hour. I am tempted to reproduce verbatim the questions and answers with Swamiji. Abdul Kalam. Swamiji, India had the vision since 1857 to be an independent nation. It took 90 years for us as a nation to get freedom. During this time, the whole nation, the young and the old, rich and poor, educated and illiterate, was together in this aim. The goal was one, focused and well understood, to acquire independence. Swamiji, what is or what can be such a vision now? Since the last 50 years, India has been a developing country. It means economically it is not strong, socially it is not stable, in security aspect it is not self-reliant, and that is why it is called a developing country. 500 members of TIFAC, Technology Information Forecasting and Assessment Council, have given thoughts to what should be the next vision for India. How do we transform a developing country into a developed country in the next 20 years? We have identified five important areas to transform India: education and healthcare, agriculture, information and communication, infrastructure, and critical technology. Swamiji, our problem is that we may present this before the government, but how do we create people with values to carry out such a big vision? What we need is a cadre of value based citizens. Otherwise, resources will not be deployed effectively as we are witnessing. For this, we need your suggestions, Swamiji. Swamiji, along with these five, you need a sixth one: faith in God and developing people through spirituality. This is very important. We need to first generate a moral and spiritual atmosphere. There has to be a change in today's climate of crime and corruption. We need people who live by the laws of the scriptures and bear faith in God. For this, we need to rekindle belief. This will make things easier. Our problems will be solved and we shall be able to achieve what we dream. Abdul Kalam, Swamiji, for carrying forward such a big vision of transforming India, should we first create a spiritual tradition, make people more spiritually inclined, and then embark upon our vision or focus on one of the important areas like education or health, or should we integrate everything and begin simultaneously? Swamiji, we must move ahead simultaneously. Work in the five fields that your team has identified for the country's progress should be continued, and this should be concurrently incorporated. Our culture teaches us to learn both para, spiritual, and apara, worldly vidya, knowledge. Therefore, together with knowledge of the apara, one should learn the para as well. If one learns this, then apara, worldly knowledge, vidya, will become founded on dharma and spirituality. One must remember that in God's scheme of things, the whole purpose behind creation is the idea that every person, every soul attains bliss. Abdul Kalam. To realize this great dream, three types of people are needed: Punya Atma, virtuous people; Punya Neta, virtuous leaders; and Punya Adhikari, virtuous officers. If the population of all the three were to increase in our society, then India would become Jagat Guru, world leader. How can their numbers be increased? Swamiji, together with your academic and scientific training, give spiritual training in our schools and colleges. Nowadays, spiritual education has become removed from the syllabi of schools and colleges. That which should be taught from infancy is being neglected, and we continue to provide only academic knowledge. But from the beginning, right from birth, people should be taught values. Only then will people become virtuous. Knowledge of a scriptures and great sadhus and sages should be included in the syllabus. The social, spiritual, and political leaders whom we hold in respect imbibe the correct values from the very beginning. In the past, such values were taught in our Gurukul system of education. Whether a prince or a pauper, everyone studied together. Along with academics, lessons such as Satyam, Vada, speak the truth, Dharmam, Chara, tread the path of righteousness, service towards others, and faith in God were taught. Abdul Kalam. Swamiji, good citizens cannot be produced by the laws of the government. Can spiritual institutions do it? Can you ask parents to guide their children to learn the right values up to the age of 15? Similarly, in all elementary schools, teachers should also instill these in the students. But if we fail to do this, then the government cannot by itself produce good, honest citizens. Is my understanding correct, Swamiji? Swamiji, yes, it's true. It's definitely true. We have been saying that from the very beginning, that values should be taught by parents at home, teachers at school, and the guru in later life. Abdul Kalam. Swamiji, when I first launched a rocket, it failed, but strengthened by ISRO's support, my team combated the failure to achieve success. This sentiment is also expressed by Thiruvalluvar in the Tirukural, where when failure occurs, challenge it with cheerful attitude. Swamiji, when one possesses such noble thoughts, patriotism is but natural. That's why we say, if spiritual knowledge is given from the beginning, love and pride for one's country, society, and dharma is a natural result. However, spiritual values should form the foundation of life. Abdul Kalam. Spiritual strength is important, and along with this, we must have economic strength, for strength is respected in the world. A combination of both is necessary, and to achieve both, there is only one answer: sweat. Hard work is a must. Swamiji, we often say human efforts and God's grace. Even failure of the first rocket which was faced was for your good. It prodded you to make things better. God has ultimately given you success. Abdul Kalam. For India's development, I wish to establish a trust, Vision 2020, with 5 like-minded individuals. I seek your blessings for this. Swamiji, God's blessings are already upon you. I shall pray that your ideas are successfully realized. May India prosper both spiritually and economically. What I wish to say is that the stronger the spiritual wealth, the stronger will become all other forms of wealth. If you increase material wealth alone, man will be lost in luxury and worldly pleasures. Spirituality will guide him back, help him rise above mundane pressures. In reality, we rarely provide what is really needed. We provide everything else: clothing, food, shelter. But with all this, we should also provide spiritual wealth. One should remember that when man gains extra money and power, more than what is necessary, then he invites ruin, restlessness, and destruction. He loses control. It's good that you have come here today. It's given us much joy. The rishis, sages of the past have also given us signs. You too are a rishi. In September 2001, I visited the Dargah Sharif of Sufi mystic Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti, better known as Garib Nawaz, at Ajmer. Here in the AD 1256, at the age of 114, the saint entered his cell to pray in seclusion for 6 days, at the end of which he passed away. As I went around the Dargah, I was struck by the beauty of all that the shrine symbolized. 800 years ago, a saint traveled from Arabia, passing through many lands before reaching Ajmer. Here he brought together different communities who lived peacefully around his shrine. The teachings and messages of Khwaja Garib Nawab have been of an exceptional character. His simple teachings penetrated even a stone heart. His affectionate look could silence the fiercest enemy. He brought the message of universal love and peace. Chishti Sufis who succeeded him continued the tradition set by him. They were truly the pioneers in national integration. The teachings of Khwaja Sahib have been recorded in several books. For him, one who possesses the magnanimity of the river, the kindness of the sun, and the humility of the earth is closest to God. Khwaja Sahib said that the noblest character is possessed by one who is graceful in poverty, content in hunger, cheerful in grief, and friendly in hostility. According to this great saint, the surest way to avoid the punishment of hell is to feed the hungry, to redress the aggrieved, and to help the distressed. Khwaja Sahib gave a role model of Harif, one who considers death as his friend, comfort as his enemy, and always remembers God. And Arif fears, respects, and possesses shyness. Why can't we conduct ourselves as Arifs? I wondered. Before any action, ask yourself this question: is what I am about to say or do going to bring me peace? As Dyer says, if the answer is yes, proceed wholeheartedly with it, and you will be allowing yourself the wisdom of your highest self. If the answer is no, be cautious of ego that is at work. The ego promotes turmoil because it separates you from everyone, including God. At Khwaja Sahib's shrine, I could listen to the voice that only wants you to be at peace with yourself. Ajmer is located in the picturesque Aravalli range. Besides the Dargah Sharif, it has the holy lake of Pushkar. These two holy places symbolize, as it were, the abiding amity between the two major religions of India. Ajmer presents a model of a peaceful society. I performed namaz at a thanksgiving for this amity. The scene reminded me of the similar location of two other religious centers, Nagore Dargah and Velankani Church. On 2nd October 2001, I visited Amrita Nandamayi Amrita Institute of Computer Technology near Kollam in Kerala with Professor N. Balakrishnan of Indian Institute of Science and G. Madhavan Nair, Director VSSC. I addressed about 1,000 young students, teachers, brahmacharis, and swamis. The topic I selected was multi-dimensional of knowledge products. I found in the students a high level of receptiveness to new ideas. In their questions, they showed interest not only in technological development but also in adhering to an honest way of life. After the interaction with the students, I met Amma. It was a remarkable experience. How can one take oneself closer to God? Was the message she was giving to the people. I wondered at the extraordinary effort that has gone into setting up an institution which could build hospitals, set up management schools of high caliber, provide housing schemes for the economically weaker sections of society. My query led to an discussion with Amma and the other sannyasis. Though the institution imparts education in all major disciplines of knowledge and creates engineers, medical doctors, management graduates, and science research scholars, they are still circumscribed by their individual specialization. Amma suddenly said, "Something is missing. How to connect?" What she was referring to was bringing together these capabilities for a joint purpose. I was at Christ College, Rajkot, getting ready for a function there when there was a call from Swamini Nikleshwarananda of the Ramakrishna Mission. Swamiji requested me to visit his ashram and I had to agree. After the function at Christ College, I rushed to the ashram. It was a time for the evening bhajan and so touched was I by the singer's serene invocation that I sat down with them for nearly 15 minutes lost in meditation. Here too I felt the same vibration as I did while meditating at Swami Vivekananda Hall, Porbandar, the birthplace of Mahatma Gandhi. On 6th October 2001, Shankaracharyas of Kanchi organized a very important gathering of farmers from hundreds of villages to launch integrated development through the concept of knowledge empowered rural development. I was invited to participate. Panchayat heads belonging to various political parties converged at Kanchi to discuss development under a project designed to provide urban facilities in rural areas. I was struck by the fact that spiritual leaders were helping focus programs for development. When the meeting ended, both acharyas called me for a private meeting. Swami Jayendra Saraswatigal inquired about the crash landing of the helicopter and blessed me. Swami Vijayendra Saraswatigal conveyed to me that the Maulvis of very famous 300-year-old mosque was waiting in the mutt to take me to the mosque. Swamiji suggested that I visit the mosque. His message brought to my mind an incident in Paramacharya's time, a decade ago, as told by the former president R. Venkatraman. Mr. Venkatraman showed me the mosque very close to the Kanchi Mutt. A few years ago, the mosque Jamayant authorities and the district authorities decided to relocate the mosque to some other suitable place as its present location was inconvenient both for the mutt and mosque. As a large number of people visit the historic mosque and there are huge gatherings at the mutt too, the traffic was becoming difficult to manage. The mutt would rebuild the mosque in its new location. Somehow this message reached the Paramacharya. He vehemently opposed the whole idea. He said, in fact, when at 4:30 a.m. the call for namaz comes from the mosque, it acts as a wake-up call for my divine duties, and also for many other reasons he was opposed to the relocation of the mosque. He made this clear to both the district authorities and the mutt. The Paramacharya went into Mauna Vridham, deep silence. Finally, shifting of the mosque was stopped. I later went to the mosque and met the Maulvi and Khazi and offered namaz there. After about 50 students were learning the Holy Quran, I sat with them and asked them to recite the Al-Hamdu, the surah that embodies the Quran. In Kanchi, I was privileged to see Vedic recitation and recitations from the Quran proceeding side by side. Therein lies the greatness and essence of India. Can Kanchi's integrated approach towards learning become a beacon for us and later for the world? During the discussions in the Shankara College of Engineering among Sanskrit professors, students, and teachers presided over by the Shankaracharyas, it became clear that ancient Sanskrit literature is a storehouse of scientific principles and methodology, even to the extent of there being texts about how to build a Viman. Subjects like physics, chemistry, medicine, Ayurveda are, of course, well documented. There was a consensus that the work of our ancient scholars and scientists should be thoroughly examined and were possibly integrated with modern science. An invitation came from the Sri Satya Sai Institute of Higher Learning at Whitefield by Professor Ramarao and me. The day began with a morning prayer at 7, followed by a discourse rendered in poetic form. Its subject was how to remove hatred from our hearts by sacrificing the ego and substituting love in its place. When Sai Baba moved amidst the devotees, the effect of his healing presence on people's pain, difficulties, and problems were immediately apparent. In January 2002, I attended a conference on medical technology and healthcare at Whitefield. All through the conference, which began at 9:30 in the morning and ended at 8 in the evening, Sri Satya Sai Baba was present. He blessed every presentation, and when I finished my 5-minute presentation on how technology would transform human life, an example being the cardiac stent that we had made, he got up and blessed me to the cheers of participants. I was impressed to see his interest in the conference as I had been impressed by the specialty hospital at Whitefield that I had visited earlier. He had been told that Chennai was facing a water problem, so when he announced that he would ensure water flowed to the city, it was more heartening still. On 3rd February 2002, I had an extraordinary spiritual experience when I visited the Brahma Kumari Spiritual Academy at Mount Abu. The deity of the Brahma Kumari, Shiva Baba, descended on one of the disciples, Dadi Gurzar. Before our eyes, her personality changed. Her face became radiant. Her voice became deeper as she talked about the four treasures: knowledge, yoga, virtue, and service. Shiva Tanu Pillai, and Selva Murthy were lucky to be called by her to the dais and blessed. As she blessed us, she said, Bharat will become the most beautiful land on earth. My interaction with the coronary artery disease patient, popularly known as Dilwalas, at the Global Hospital and Research Center of the Brahma Kumari Academy, headed by Dr. Pratap Mida, clearly illustrated that the mind-body interaction, a subject I touched upon at the end of the previous chapter, is vital for health, which is defined as physical, mental, spiritual well-being. My friend Dr. W. Selvamurthy postulated through years of clinical work that yoga and meditation significantly alleviated pain. The experiments which I had the opportunity to initiating through the Defense Institute of Physiology and Applied Sciences when I was scientific advisor to Defense Minister include a new approach towards healing through mind-body synchrony. Dr. Pratap Mida and Dr. Selvamurthy joined together and formulated a unique treatment for cardiac patients. When I reviewed this project 2 years back, about 60 patients reported an improved sense of well-being. Now it has yielded excellent results with 400 patients reporting progress. The treatment included lifestyle intervention with Raja Yoga meditation for stress management, low-fat, high-fiber diet for reducing risk of hyperlipidemia, and regular aerobic exercises or walking to improve the cardiovascular and metabolic efficiencies. And I hope that medical treatment will begin to lay greater emphasis on healing not only the body but also the mind. During my previous visit to the Brahma Kumari Spiritual Academy at Mount Abu, Sister Usha had given me the task of interacting in a group discussion with 30 Brahma Kumaris who had recently joined. It was a pleasure to look at their bright faces bubbling with enthusiasm. In a post-dinner session, when I asked them in turn about their mission in life, the reply was unanimous: to serve the people through spiritual endeavors. Dr. Selva Murthy and I were moved to recite a Tamil poem composed 1000 years ago by Avvaiyar, which in translation reads thus: It is rare to be born as a human being. It is still more rare to be born without any deformity. Even if you are born without any deformity, it is rare to be acquire knowledge and education. Even if one could acquire knowledge and education, it is still rare to do offerings and tapas. But for one who does offerings and tapas, the doors of heaven open to greet him. I then narrated to the Brahma Kumaris how the bishops at Tumba allowed transfer of the land belonging to the church for setting up a space research station as given in chapter 3 of this book. What is the conclusion to be drawn from this story? I asked them. The Brahmakumaris responded by saying that our civilization is rich, which leads to forward thinking, harmony, and better understanding. With such a great nation and people, why are there communal clashes? I think that when a nation doesn't have a vision, small minds take over its affairs. The unification of science and spirituality will be essential to take the benefit of science and technology to mankind. In 1911, Sir Aurobindo wrote in the Song of Humanity, a time will come when the Indian mind will shake off the darkness that has fallen upon it, cease to think or hold opinions at second or third hand, and reassert its rights to judge and inquire with perfect freedom into the meaning of its own culture and tradition. That is the future we need to work towards as we shake off the shackles of poverty. There was one message common to all the places I visited. There is a higher self within you that transcends the limitations of the physical world. I felt the presence of this higher self in my father. I have learned over the years to maintain my equanimity regardless of circumstances. I have faced failures and disappointments without feeling defeated. I wish to live the rest of my life at peace with myself and others. I have no wish to engage in quarrels with others. This is the challenge before the individual as he tries to transcend his limitation. At this point, I recall a surah from the Holy Quran. O Prophet, you proclaim to the people who do not accept your preachings, what you worship, I do not worship, and what I worship, you do not worship. The result of your actions belong to you. The result of my actions belong to me. What we are, what we believe in our is ours alone. Once we have trust in the wisdom that created us, we can develop a faith that sustains us through our lives. Indians are well versed with the concept of higher self, or perhaps highest self in the preferable term. For generations, our ancestors lived their lives by this concept, but for many today, rooted perhaps too deeply in the material world, this idea sounds lofty and spiritual. For me, it has been a cornerstone of the way I live. On one occasion, as I was leaving for Bangalore, I spoke to a friend of mine and told him that I would be talking to young people and whether he had any suggestions. He did not offer any suggestions as such, but offered me these nuggets of wisdom. When you speak, speak the truth. Perform when you promise. Discharge your trust. Withhold your hands from striking and from taking that which is unlawful and bad. What actions are most excellent? To gladden the heart of the human being, to feed the hungry, to help the afflicted, to lighten the sorrow of the sorrowful, and to remove the wrongs of the injured. All God's creatures are His family, and He is the most beloved of God who tries to do most good to God's creatures. These are the sayings of Prophet Muhammad. My friend who told me this is a great grandson of a Dikshidhar of Tamil Nadu and grandson of Ganapathigal, Vedic scholar, is none other than Y.S. Rajan. Such an outlook is possible only in our country. Let us remember the Rig Veda. Ano Bhadra Kratavo Yentu Vishwa Taha. That is, let noble thoughts come to us from every side. I recall an event that took place in my family. My great grandfather and grandfather were called Ambalakarar noble leaders in Rameshwaram. This island has the privilege of being known as the place where Lord Rama is said to have launched his campaign against Ravana. The island celebrates this event by organizing his marriage with Sita, his divine counterpart. My great grandfather would provide a floating platform for the occasion to carry the decorated Vigraha through the holy tank named Ramar Tirtham. The tank is very deep, and the floating platform with Vigraha bedecked with beautiful gold ornaments of Lord Rama is taken around a small mandapa at the center of the tank. Then and now all the Rameshwaram assembles for this occasion. One year, my great grandfather was witnessing the event when a mishap took place. The Vigraha toppled down and sank. Without any hesitation on prompting, he jumped into the tank and recovered the Vigraha as the entire town watched. The temple priest instituted Mutal Maryade, first honor for our family. There was a special prayer in the Rameshwaram mosque to thank the Almighty for the recovery of the Vigraha and to bring God's grace on our family. I have always considered this incident as a shining example of human brotherhood and harmony, especially significant in today's context. Could not each of us help nurture such a brotherhood wherever we happen to be? On 15th August 1947, my high school teacher, Reverend Ayyadurai Solomon, took me to hear the midnight freedom speech of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. We were all moved to hear him say that we were free. Banner headlines announced the momentous event in next day's newspaper. But alongside the report of Panditji's speech in the Tamil newspaper I read was another news item, one that has been embedded in my memory. It was about how Mahatma Gandhi was walking barefoot in Noakhali to help assuage the pain of the riot-affected families there. Normally, as father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi should have been on the ramparts of Red Fort, the first one to unfurl the national flag. Instead, he was at Noakhali. Such was the Mahatma's greatness, and what an everlasting impact it left on the minds of a schoolboy. Having sensed the pulse of the young and armed with the wisdom of the elders, I thought deeply about my own experience with technology projects where people worked on problems that were new and demanded efforts that were unprecedented. What really makes one succeed is the face of difficult task. The face of difficult tasks. We have talked about the importance of having a dream and of commitment, of hard work, having the spiritual strength to persevere through difficulties and failures. And is there anything missing in the cycle of creation? Summary. Our spiritual wisdom has been our strength. We survive as a nation the onslaughts of invaders and the numbing effects of colonialism. We have also learned to adjust to the rifts and divisions in our own society. But in the process of all the adjustments, we also lowered our aims and expectations. We must regain our broad outlook and draw upon our heritage and wisdom to ensure our lives. The fact that we advance technologically does not preclude spiritual development. We need to home grow our own model of development based on our inherent strengths. Inherent strengths.